Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
By the time I hit my 20s, I'd learned to keep my circle tight and my loyalty tighter. My best friend and I had been inseparable since middle school. We'd been through everything together, from bad breakups to worse haircuts. She was the kind of person who saw the best in everyone, sometimes to a fault. That's how she ended up with this absolute waste of space for a boyfriend. They'd been together for about a year when she first caught him cheating. I remember the night she called me, sobbing so hard I could barely understand what she was saying. When she finally got the words out, I was furious. Not just at him, but at the situation. She deserved so much better than some guy who couldn't keep it in his pants. But here's the thing about my friend. She had this huge heart that sometimes got in the way of her common sense. She forgave him. Actually, forgave him. She told me he promised it would never happen again, that he was sorry, that she was the only one he truly loved. I bit my tongue because it wasn't my relationship, but I couldn't stand the guy after that. Every time she showed me photos of them together, smiling and looking happy, all I could think about was how he'd broken her trust, and she just handed it right back to him. This was back in the 90s, before everyone walked around with a smartphone attached to their hand. If you wanted to reach someone, you called their house phone or tracked them down in person. It was a simpler time in some ways, more complicated in others. One Friday night, I decided to hit up this club downtown with some co-workers. It was nothing fancy, just a place with cheap drinks and decent music where people went to blow off steam after a long week. I was standing at the bar waiting to order when I spotted him across the room. I recognized him immediately from all those photos my friend had shown me. Even in the dim lighting, there was no mistaking that face. And there he was, leaning against a pillar, chatting up some blonde woman who was laughing at whatever garbage he was feeding her. My blood started boiling. So much for never again. So much for my friend being the only one he truly loved. I watched him for a bit, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to walk over there and call him out right then and there, but another part of me, the smarter part, realized this was an opportunity. He must have felt me staring because he turned and made eye contact. I didn't look away. Instead, I gave him a small smile. His eyes lit up like he'd just won the lottery, and he ditched the blonde without a second thought, making his way over to me. He greeted me and said he hadn't seen me there before. I told him it was my first time and that a friend had recommended the place. He said my friend had good taste and offered to buy me a drink. I accepted. He ordered us both drinks and launched into what I'm sure he thought was his best material. He asked me what I did for work, what I like to do for fun, all the standard pickup lines. I played along, giving him vague answers and laughing at his jokes that weren't funny. The whole time I was thinking about my friend at home, probably thinking her boyfriend was out with his buddies, trusting him completely. He told me he felt like we had a real connection. I asked him if he really thought so. He said he didn't usually feel this way about someone he just met, and that there was something special about me. I almost laughed in his face. This was the same line he'd probably used on my friend, on that blonde from earlier, on who knows how many other women. I told him that was sweet of him to say. He said he'd love to see me again and asked if he could get my number. This was it. This was my chance. Back then, we didn't just type numbers into phones. We wrote them down on whatever was handy. I grabbed a napkin from the bar and a pen. I told him sure and that I'd write it down for him. I scribbled down a fake name, Jill, something completely different from my actual name. And then, right underneath it, I wrote down my friend's phone number, her home phone number that he should have known by heart. I handed him the napkin with a smile. I told him to call me anytime. He said he definitely would. He tucked the napkin into his pocket like it was treasure, gave me what he probably thought was a smoldering look, and walked away to rejoin his friends. I finished my drink and left shortly after, feeling like I just pulled off the greatest undercover operation of my life. The next morning, my friend called me around 10. She told me I wouldn't believe what had happened the night before. I asked her what. She explained that she was home alone the previous night and her phone rang at like 1 in the morning. She answered it, and it was her boyfriend, except he was clearly drunk, and he asked if someone named Jill was there. He called her number and asked for someone named Jill. I asked what she said to him. She told me she said there was no Jill there and asked who the hell Jill was. He got all confused and hung up. Then that morning he tried to tell her it was a wrong number, that he got confused. But she knew he was lying. She knew exactly what had happened. I told her I was sorry. She said not to be sorry. She was done, actually done this time. She couldn't keep doing this to herself. She broke up with him that day. I didn't tell her it was me at the club, didn't tell her I was the one who'd set the whole thing up. I figured she didn't need to know right then. She needed to focus on moving on. And move on she did. A few months later, she met this incredible guy at a bookstore. They started talking about their favorite authors and ended up getting coffee that turned into dinner, that turned into a second date and a third date. Within a year, they were engaged. He treated her the way she'd always deserved to be treated, with respect and actual love. At her engagement party, after a few glasses of wine, I finally told her the truth. I explained everything, from spotting her ex at the club to writing down her number on that napkin. She asked me if I was the one, if I was Jill. I confirmed that, yeah, it was me. I told her I couldn't just let him keep doing that to her. She stared at me for a second and then she burst out laughing. Not just a polite chuckle, but a full belly laugh that had her doubled over. She told me that was the most brilliant thing she'd ever heard. She called me a genius, an absolute genius. I said I probably should have told her sooner. She asked if I was kidding. She said the timing was perfect. If I told her back then, she might not have believed me, or she might have convinced herself to give him another chance. But now she could appreciate how absolutely hilarious it was that he called her number asking for another woman. She thanked me for looking out for her. I told her always. She said she meant it. If I hadn't done that, she might have wasted years with him. Instead, she found someone who actually deserved her. She married that bookstore guy 6 months later. I met my ex-wife when I was 26. She had a 1-year-old daughter from a previous relationship. The father wasn't in the picture. Never had been. Never wanted to be. When we started dating, I knew what I was getting into. I wasn't some naive kid. I knew that dating a single mom meant stepping up and being there for both of them. We got married after dating for a year. Her daughter was 2 by then, and I'd already been acting like her dad for months. Changing diapers, reading bedtime stories, all of it. It felt natural. 2 years into our marriage, we had our own daughter. She was 18 months old now, beautiful, perfect, mine. The marriage lasted 4 years total. Things fell apart last year. No big blowout, no cheating. We just stopped working. The divorce was relatively clean. We agreed on 50-50 custody of our daughter. I made significantly more money than my ex-wife, so I volunteered to cover our daughter's insurance and send her monthly payments. I wanted my kid to have a stable life, a comfortable one that was non-negotiable for me. During our marriage, my ex-wife had been a stay-at-home mom the entire time. I handled all the finances. Both kids got what they needed. New clothes when they outgrew the old ones, toys, activities. I never treated my ex-wife's older daughter differently than I treated our daughter. She called me dad. I signed permission slips. I went to school events. For 4 years, I was her father in every way that mattered except biologically. But after the divorce, everything changed. My ex-wife's older daughter wasn't my responsibility anymore. That's how I saw it. I still had my daughter every other week, and we did everything together. The zoo, the aquarium, parks, museums. She got new outfits regularly because I could afford it, and I wanted her to have nice things. The problem started about 3 months after the divorce was finalized. I was dropping our daughter off at my ex-wife's apartment. My ex-wife was standing in the doorway with her older daughter right behind her. She told me we needed to talk. I asked her about what. She pointed to her older daughter and said we needed to talk about her. The kid was standing there looking up at me with these big confused eyes. I asked what about her. My ex-wife said I was treating her like she didn't exist. That I took our daughter out and did all these fun things and bought her new clothes, but ignored her older daughter completely. I told her that her older daughter wasn't my daughter anymore. My ex-wife's voice got sharp. She said her daughter had been my daughter for 4 years, that I'd been her dad, that I couldn't just stop. I told her we were divorced, that her older daughter was her daughter, not mine. The older daughter's face crumpled. She turned and ran back into the apartment. My ex-wife's expression went from frustrated to furious in half a second. She called me a real piece of work, asked if I knew that, said I'd spent 4 years acting like her daughter's father, and now I was just done. Like the kid had meant nothing. I said I didn't say she meant nothing, but I wasn't responsible for her anymore. I was paying my ex-wife every month so our daughter had what she needs. I was covering insurance. I was doing everything I was supposed to do. My ex-wife asked what her older daughter needed. She said the kid asked about me constantly, that she didn't understand why I didn't want to see her anymore. I told her that wasn't my problem. My ex-wife stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Then she took our daughter from my arms and slammed the door in my face. That conversation kept happening. Every pickup, every drop-off. My ex-wife would bring it up. She'd tell me her older daughter was struggling, that she was asking why I didn't love her anymore, that she cried when our daughter came home with new toys and clothes because she didn't get anything. I tried to explain it wasn't about love, it was about responsibility. I couldn't afford to fund 2 kids when one of them wasn't mine. My ex-wife made it clear she couldn't give her older daughter the same lifestyle we used to provide. But that wasn't my fault. I didn't ask to get divorced. I didn't ask to stop being that kid's dad. It just happened. Eventually, I called my mom to vent. I thought she'd take my side. She'd always been reasonable, practical. I told her my ex-wife was driving me crazy, that she wanted me to keep paying for her older daughter like nothing had changed. My mom asked if I didn't want to. I said, why would I? The kid wasn't mine. My mom said she had been mine for 4 years, that I'd raised her, that I'd been her father. I argued that I wasn't anymore. My mom said that didn't matter, that her older daughter was still her granddaughter, that she still thought of her that way, that I was being cruel. I said I was being practical. My mom called me a massive jerk, said that little girl didn't do anything wrong, that she didn't ask for me to leave, and now I was punishing her for it. I insisted I wasn't punishing anyone, that I just didn't want to keep paying for a kid that wasn't mine. My mom said then I was a bigger jerk than she thought. She hung up on me. I sat there staring at my phone trying to figure out how I'd become the bad guy. A week later, I got a text from my ex-wife. She said her daughter had asked her today if I hated her, that she was 6 years old and she thought I hated her. She asked if I was happy now. I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? 2 weeks after that, I showed up to pick up our daughter, and my ex-wife's older daughter answered the door. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she asked me why I didn't love her anymore. I froze. I didn't have an answer, not one that would make sense to a 6-year-old. She stood there waiting, and I just stared back at her like an idiot. I finally managed to say it wasn't like that. She asked me then what was it like. I didn't answer. I just took our daughter and left. When I got home, I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to convince myself I was doing the right thing. But I couldn't shake the look on that kid's face. She didn't understand. How could she? I'm 72 years old, and I've lived in this same house for 45 years. My husband passed away 8 years ago, and my kids are always trying to get me to move into some retirement community, but I'm not going anywhere. I've got my garden, my routines, and my independence. Plus, I've got Betsy, my 12-gauge shotgun that my husband taught me how to use when we first moved out here to the countryside. The trouble started about 3 months ago when a new family moved into the rental property down the road. The house had been empty for over a year, so I was curious to see who'd be moving in. I baked some cookies and took them over to introduce myself, like any good neighbor would do. That's when I first met her. The woman answered the door with this fake smile plastered on her face, and I could tell right away something was off about her. She took my cookies without even saying thank you, just grabbed the plate and looked at them like I'd handed her garbage. She made some comment about how quaint homemade cookies were, then said she didn't usually eat things made in kitchens she hadn't inspected personally. She added that she supposed it was the thought that counts. but her tone made it clear she didn't mean it. I tried to be polite and introduce myself, told her I lived down the road, and if she needed anything to let me know. She immediately asked if I could help her unpack since I was offering. She mentioned her back had been bothering her and she'd noticed I seemed quite spry for my age. I politely declined, said I had my own things to take care of, and she got this look on her face like I'd just insulted her entire bloodline. From that day on, she made my life difficult. She complained about my rooster crowing in the morning even though we're in the country and that's just part of living here. She called the county about my fence, saying it was an eyesore. She even tried to get my dog taken away, claiming he was vicious, when old Duke wouldn't hurt a fly and mostly just slept on the porch all day. But I never expected what happened last Tuesday. I gone into town for my weekly grocery shopping and to pick up my prescriptions. The pharmacy was running behind, so I ended up being gone longer than usual, about 4 hours total. When I pulled back into my driveway, I noticed something immediately wrong. My front door was slightly open, and I knew for certain I'd locked it before leaving. My heart started pounding, but I've never been one to panic. I quietly reached into my truck's back seat where I keep Betsy locked in a case. My hands were shaking a bit when I loaded her, but my husband's voice came back to me clear from all those years ago. Steady hands, steady mind. I crept up to my front door and pushed it open slowly. I could hear someone rummaging around in my bedroom, drawers opening and closing, things being moved around. Duke was barking from the backyard where I'd left him, probably going crazy hearing an intruder inside. I made my way down the hallway, Betsy raised and ready. When I got to my bedroom door, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was her, the woman from down the road, going through my jewelry box on my dresser. She had already stuffed several pieces into her pockets, and she was holding my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one piece of jewelry that meant more to me than anything else in the world. I chambered around, and the sound made her freeze. I told her to put down the necklace and turn around slowly. I made it clear she needed to keep her hands where I could see them. She spun around, and the shock on her face would have been funny if I wasn't so angry. She started yelling about what I was doing and how I could hurt someone with that thing. I told her that was exactly the point. She'd broken into my house and was stealing from me. I ordered her to put everything back and get on the ground. She tried to claim she wasn't stealing. She said she was just looking around because she'd heard suspicious noises and thought I might be in trouble. She insisted she was trying to help. I asked her if she was trying to help by going through my jewelry box. I told her to try again. She started threatening me, saying I was making a huge mistake. She asked if I knew who her husband was, and said that when he found out about this, I'd be sorry. She claimed she'd have me arrested for threatening her and that it was assault with a deadly weapon. I told her the only one getting arrested was her. I ordered her to get down on the ground before I decided she was still a threat. She finally seemed to realize I was serious and got down on her knees, still running her mouth about how I'd regret this and how she was going to sue me for everything I had. I kept Betsy trained on her while I called 911 with my other hand. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me until the sheriff's department arrived about 15 minutes later. Those were the longest 15 minutes of my life, listening to her go on and on about how this was all a misunderstanding and how I was a crazy old woman who shouldn't be allowed to own firearms. When the deputies arrived, they found my kitchen window had been jimmied open. That's how she'd gotten in. They also found more of my belongings in her pockets, some cash from my dresser drawer, a silver watch that belonged to my husband, and several other pieces of jewelry. Turns out this wasn't her first time doing something like this. The deputies ran her information and found she had warrants in 2 other states for similar crimes. She'd been moving around, renting houses in rural areas, targeting elderly people who lived alone. She was arrested right there in my bedroom, screaming the whole time about her rights and how this was entrapment and police brutality. The deputies were impressed with how I'd handled the situation. One of them told me I'd probably prevented her from robbing half the county. They took her away in handcuffs, and I gave my statement. The prosecutor told me later that with the break-in, the theft, and her outstanding warrants, she was looking at serious prison time. My kids called me that evening after they heard what happened. They wanted to rush over and make sure I was okay, but I told them I was fine. Better than fine. I finally got my grandmother's pearls back in my jewelry box where they belonged, and I didn't have to worry about that woman causing any more problems for me or anyone else in the neighborhood. Duke got extra treats that night for being a good watchdog, even if he couldn't do much from the backyard. And Betsy got cleaned and put back in her case, right where she'd be if I ever needed her again. For about 8 months now, I've been at this food truck. I'm usually there from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, which means I'm dealing with the lunch crowd when things get absolutely crazy. We're parked downtown near the business district, so between 11 and 1:30, there's barely a moment to breathe, let alone check my phone. My friend and I have known each other for about 3 years. We met through mutual friends and hit it off quickly. We'd hang out regularly, grab coffee, complain about life, the usual friendship stuff, but over the past few months, I'd noticed she was getting increasingly demanding of my time and attention. If I didn't respond to her messages within an hour, she'd start sending follow-up texts, asking if I was mad at her or if she'd done something wrong. I'd explained multiple times that I had a job and couldn't always be available to chat, but it never seemed to sink in. This day started like any other. I got to the truck at 8:45 to help with prep, and by 9 we were open and ready for business. My phone was in my pocket on silent, like it always was during work hours. The owners had made it clear from day one that phones stayed put away unless it was an emergency. I wasn't about to risk my job by scrolling through messages when I should be taking orders and handling food. Around 10:30, during a brief lull, I felt my phone buzzing repeatedly in my pocket. I ignored it. Whatever it was could wait until my shift ended. Then the lunch rush hit, and I completely forgot about it. At 2:05, after we'd closed up and I'd finished cleaning, I finally pulled out my phone. I had 17 messages from my friend. 17! I opened the conversation and immediately felt my blood pressure rising. The first message had come in at 10:15. She said she needed to talk to me about something. Then 10 minutes later, she sent another message just saying hello with a question mark. Another 10 minutes after that, she asked if I was seriously ignoring her right now. Then things got nasty. She told me this was typical and that my parents probably taught me it was okay to just ignore people when they needed me. I stared at that message for a solid 30 seconds. She was bringing my parents into this, my parents who had nothing to do with anything. She sent another message saying she couldn't believe I'd do this to her when I knew she was going through stuff right now. Then she told me to be that way. She said she was going through a really hard time, and apparently I didn't care. She said the whole situation was messed up. Then came the final message that really got me. She said she wasn't going near that food truck ever and told me to take a hint. She added that she had her own stuff to deal with on top of this. Take a hint? Take a hint about what? I've been at work, doing my job. The job she knew I had because I talked about it constantly. The job that had set hours that I'd mentioned multiple times. I sat in my car in the parking lot and typed out my response. I told her no, how about she took a hint? I said I was at work and couldn't message back when I was working. The 3 dots appeared immediately. She was typing. She asked if I couldn't take 2 seconds to tell her that. I replied that no, I couldn't. I explained that I was serving customers and doing the job I got paid to do. The job that I told her about 100 times. The job that didn't allow me to be on my phone. She insisted that everyone could spare 2 seconds. I shot back that not when there is a line of 20 people waiting for food and you're the only one taking orders. Not when your boss is standing right there watching you work. Not when you like being employed. She just replied with whatever and said she'd needed me and I wasn't there. I reminded her that I was at work. I pointed out that she'd messaged me at 10:15 on a weekday morning and asked when she thought I'd be available. She said she thought our friendship meant more than my stupid food truck job. That message sat there on my screen like a slap in the face. My stupid food truck job. The job that paid my rent. The job that kept me fed and independent. The job I actually enjoyed most days. I told her that my stupid food truck job was how I survived. I said that her messaging me during work hours, then insulting my parents, then threatening to never come to my workplace like that was some kind of punishment wasn't okay. None of that was okay. She claimed she was just upset. I responded that being upset didn't give her the right to attack me for working. I asked what exactly I was supposed to do. Tell my boss sorry. Can't make sandwiches right now. My friend needs to vent. Get fired so I could be available for her 24/7. She accused me of being dramatic. I told her I was being realistic. I said she knew I was working and that she'd always known my schedule. And she still chose to blow up my phone and then insult me and my family when I didn't drop everything to respond. The dots appeared and disappeared several times. Then nothing. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. Finally, a message came through where she said she thought we needed some space. I agreed that was probably for the best. I blocked her number after that. Not out of spite, but because I knew this pattern would just repeat itself if I didn't. She'd apologize in a few days, promise to respect my boundaries, and then the exact same thing would happen the next time she decided she needed immediate attention. 2 weeks later, I heard from another mutual friend that she'd been telling people I'd abandoned her during a crisis, that I'd chosen my job over our friendship, that I was a terrible person who didn't care about anyone but myself. But here's the thing, that same mutual friend had also heard her version of events and immediately called it out as nonsense, because normal people understand that having a job means you can't always be available. Normal people don't insult someone's parents because they didn't text back fast enough. Normal people don't try to guilt-trip their friends for working. I still work at the food truck. The owners gave me a raise last month, and my phone stays in my pocket during shifts, right where it belongs. I'm a junior at Northeastern in Boston, majoring in computer science. Between classes, assignments, and trying to have some kind of social life, I needed a job that wouldn't completely drain me. That's how I ended up with this front desk position at one of the campus dorms about 8 months ago. My job is simple. I sit at a desk, check student identification cards, tap them on a reader, and let people into the building. The shift is usually 4 hours, and I work 3 times a week. Most shifts I get through half my coding assignments or catch up on readings. The pay is $12 an hour, which isn't amazing, but it's steady, on campus, and pretty low stress most of the time. The setup at this dorm is straightforward. There's a desk in the middle of the lobby. On my left is the entrance door where people come in from outside. On my right is the exit door that leads into the building. The card reader I use is mounted on my right side of the desk, right next to my laptop. The whole system makes sense when you think about it. People walk up to the front of the desk, hand me their identification, I tap it on the reader to my right, hand it back, and they walk through. Takes maybe 30 seconds. That's how literally everyone does it. I've checked in hundreds, probably thousands of students at this point. Athletes coming back from practice at 10 p.m. Students stumbling in at 3 in the morning after studying at the library. People bringing guests over for game nights or study groups. Delivery drivers dropping off food orders. Everyone figures out the system quickly. You approach the front, I check you in, you go about your life. The desk is clearly designed for this flow. There's even a small sign on the front that says, "Please approach here for check-in." Except for this one girl. The first time she did it was about 2 weeks ago. I thought maybe she was confused about where to stand. She walked right past the entire front of the desk and positioned herself on my left side, near the entrance door. So instead of me just reaching forward and taking her card like normal, I had to turn my entire body around to the left, take her identification from her, swivel back to my right to reach the card reader, tap it, then turn all the way back around to my left to return it to her. It was awkward and made zero sense, but whatever. Maybe she was new to the building. Maybe she didn't realize there was a front to the desk. Then she did it again 3 days later. Same exact thing. Walked right past where any logical person would stand and planted herself on my left by the entrance. At that point, I was definitely annoyed, but I was in the middle of debugging some code for a project that was due the next day. I just didn't have the energy to address it. I turned around, processed her card, turned back. Fine. I noticed she always came in around 7 p.m., right when my shift started, like clockwork. And every single time she did the same thing. Stood on my left, made me turn around completely. never once considered standing at the front like a normal person. I started dreading 7 p.m. because I knew she'd show up and do her thing. But then she came back tonight with her friend, and that's when I lost my patience. I heard them before I saw them. She was talking really loud, putting on this super fake accent that she definitely doesn't normally have, clearly trying to impress her friend or sound cooler than she actually is. They walked through the entrance at 7:15 p.m., and I looked up from my laptop, already sensing this was going to be annoying. Her friend, who seemed like a normal person, walked up to the front of the desk like a reasonable human being. She even had her identification card already out and ready. But this girl walked right past the desk again and stood on my left side near the entrance door. Her friend looked genuinely confused, looking between her and me, clearly not understanding what was happening. The friend held out her card toward the front of the desk where I was sitting, but the girl just stood there on my left, arms crossed, waiting for me to turn around and come to her. The friend asked quietly if they were allowed to stand there, and this girl responded with the most entitled attitude I've heard in months. She said, yeah, it was more convenient for her to stand there. She said it loud enough for me to hear, like she wanted me to know that her convenience was all that mattered. Her friend looked even more confused and kind of embarrassed. More convenient for her. Not for me, the person doing the job, not following the system that literally everyone else manages to figure out. Not considering that maybe the desk is set up a certain way for a reason. Not thinking about the fact that I have to twist my entire body around multiple times just because she can't be bothered to walk 3 extra feet. No, what mattered was her convenience. Something snapped inside me. I didn't say anything. I just reached over and took the friend's card from the front of the desk first. Then I turned to my left, reached out my hand, and waited. The girl handed me her card with this smug look on her face, like she'd won something. I turned to my right and tapped both cards on the reader, one after another. The system beeped twice, confirming they were signed in. Then, instead of turning back around to my left, where she was standing with her hand out expecting me to return the cards, I placed both cards down on the far right end of the desk, the complete opposite side from where she was standing, as far from her as physically possible while still being on the desk, right next to the exit door. I looked directly at her with the most blank, dead stare I could manage. Didn't smile, didn't say a word, just stared for about 3 seconds. Then I turned back to my laptop and went back to typing like nothing had happened, like they didn't even exist anymore. Her friend stood there for a second, clearly confused about what was happening. She looked at me, then at the cards on the far right end of the desk, then at her friend still standing on my left. Then she realized the cards were on the other end of the desk and had to awkwardly walk all the way around to grab them. She had to walk past the entire front of the desk, around to the right side just to reach the cards. Meanwhile, Miss More Convenience stood there frozen, trying to process what had just occurred. I could feel her staring at me, probably waiting for me to acknowledge her or apologize or something. I didn't look up. I just kept typing and my fingers were just hitting random keys at that point because I wasn't actually working on anything, but she didn't need to know that. The friend grabbed both cards and had to walk all the way back around to hand one to her. The girl finally moved from her spot and met her friend halfway. I could see her face out of the corner of my eye. She looked annoyed and confused, like she couldn't believe someone had actually pushed back against her little power move. They walked through to the building without saying anything, but I could hear her friend asking what that was about. The friend's voice was quiet, but I could tell she was genuinely confused about the whole situation. I couldn't hear her response, and honestly, I didn't care. The doors closed behind them, and I finally let myself smile a little. If it's convenient for you to make me turn around and do extra work for no reason, then it's convenient for me to make you walk around the entire desk to get your card back. Simple as that. You want to ignore basic courtesy and common sense? Fine. Two can play that game. The rest of my shift was peaceful. Every single person who came through after that stood at the front of the desk like a normal human being. A group of 3 students came in at 7:45 p.m. All 3 walked right up to the front, handed me their cards. I processed them, handed them back. Smooth and easy. An athlete came in at 8:20 p.m. after practice, completely exhausted. still managed to walk up to the front of the desk. A student came in with her parents at 8:50 p.m. to show them the dorm. All three stood at the front. It was almost therapeutic watching the system work exactly as it should. No unnecessary turning, no attitude, just people being reasonable and respectful of how things are supposed to work. I finished my shift at 11 p.m. and packed up my stuff. When I was walking out, I passed by the resident assistant on duty. She asked me how my shift went. I just smiled and said it was fine. She didn't need to know about my petty victory, but I felt good about it. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.